Hi, feminine princesses. I just finished the story of Nehemiah, and I actually recorded Esther first because I couldn't find my notes. I'm still in transition, but I'm going to go ahead anyway and do it from my memory. So it helped me put into perspective a lot of things that I've been reading in the Old Testament, and namely that Ezra and Nehemiah were actually one book. They've separated it in modern times, but in the Hebrew Bible, it's actually one book, as well as it was both written by Ezra as well as 1st and 2nd Chronicles. The reason being, 1st and 2nd Chronicles have a priestly point of view. The book of Ezra has a priestly point of view, and the book of Nehemiah has a prophet's point of view. Now, Ezra was a priest as well as a scribe. Nehemiah was a prophet and had been interviewed by Ezra for the book of Nehemiah, and you can see that when it says in the words of Nehemiah, and then he writes for him as if he were a ghostwriter, but we know that he was the author, contributed to writing this one whole book. Now, as a youth, I thought it was the same story. Reading the story as an adult, I discovered that the book of Ezra focuses on rebuilding of the temple as he was focusing on the spiritual. And Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah, focuses on rebuilding the city as well as the gates of Jerusalem, and he was focused on social reform. So we have two different perspectives here, and amazingly, the book of Esther happens in between them. So Ezra is working on the temple, and he reads the book of the law, the book of Moses to the people, and Nehemiah comes on the scene, and he is repairing all these gates as well as the city, and they intertwine, so they were contemporaries, as well as chapters 1 through 6 in Nehemiah focuses on Zerubbabel bringing a number of people back to Jerusalem, while 100 years later, chapters 7 through 10 focuses on Nehemiah bringing about 2,000 people back to Jerusalem to rebuild. Now, in between that time of Zerubbabel and Nehemiah is 100 years. And during that 100 years, Esther, the story of Esther happens. And you can see this as true because Zerubbabel, the chapters 1 through 6, some of the people he listed that he brought back was Mordecai. He was listed among them. So you can see all of these stories are actually overlapping and intertwining, and they have a connection to one another. So I found it interesting that, again, some of the enemies opposed the work, and they had to either ignore or address or fight them. And they had to build with one hand with a weapon and one hand with a tool so that they can continue God's work while fighting off their enemies. So I see it interesting. This is a physical portrait of a spiritual strategy that when we're working for the Lord and doing things in our lives that the Lord has given us to do, we must have in one hand continue to go forward, and on the other hand we have this spiritual battle and spiritual war and spiritual enemy that we also have to fight while we're doing the work. Another thing that was interesting is Nehemiah being a cupbearer to Xerxes in his kingdom, his court. He understood protocol of the king. He understood protocol of royalty, and he left all that. He left the comfort of a salary, a comfort of security, comfort of high esteem. He left all of that to go into an unknown situation. What is the gate going to look like? What is the city going to look like? Will I have resources? Will I have finances? Will I have support? Will people want to fight for my cause with me and help me do the work? All of these things were unknown, but all he knew was that he had this desire in his heart to rebuild this city for the Lord, and the Lord gave him favor with the king as well as the people. So that was interesting that he You know, we hear of these stories of people saying that the Lord called them to go on a mission trip or across seas or to move across the states and go into an unknown place and do this work for God. And some of them struggle with the instruction and some of them obey right away. And some of them, you know, we hear very few stories where people don't answer that calling, and hopefully that's none of us. They tell about how the favor of God was upon them once they moved and did the work, even though they had all these unknowns. Well, these modern day experiences also happen in biblical times. Nehemiah is a great example of one of them. So I hope these stories are encouraging you and inspiring you not only to read on with me and complete this Bible challenge. And by the way, in the comments below, please tell me where you are. Are you in a previous book or in a later book? Have you finished it, or you're right with me in Nehemiah? I hope it's inspiring you to live out these principles we're learning and take these strategies and implement them in our own lives. Now have put together all that information in a very beautiful, pretty ebook. And if you're interested in that, I will have a link down below to my website, which offers this ebook.